Order in the court. The bailiff's voice cut through the air like a whip, deep and commanding. The sound seemed to bounce off the high wooden walls of the courtroom, silencing the tense whispers that had been swirling like a low storm. For a split second, even the clicking of reporters' cameras from the hallway outside faded into stillness. Inside, the atmosphere was electric, heavy with anticipation, yet buzzing with nervous energy. Spectators shifted in their seats, clutching their phones, eyes fixed on the front. The air smelled faintly of polished oak and stale coffee, the kind that came from the vending machine in the courthouse lobby. And there he was, Kody Brown. Once the charismatic patriarch of the sprawling polygamous family America came to know on Sister Wives, Kody now sat at the defendant's table. His hair, once his signature golden mane, was tied back neatly. His suit was sharp, but his eyes were restless, scanning the packed room like a man counting his enemies. His jaw was tight, and he kept shifting in his chair as if the polished wood was far more uncomfortable than he expected. It wasn't the Kody the public remembered. The one who cracked jokes over family dinners, who navigated marital arguments with camera crews filming. No, this was a Kody facing the cold, unblinking reality of the justice system. The charge? Alleged financial misconduct involving over $1 million. Not a plot twist from a TLC script, but a real looming accusation that could strip away more than his freedom. It could dismantle his legacy. In the back, whispers rose and fell like waves. Former fans and curious onlookers traded theories. Do you think he did it? One woman whispered to her friend, another shook her head. If half of what's in the news is true, this is bad, really bad. But the moment Judge Callahan entered, the noise dissolved. She was known for her sharp mind and zero tolerance for theatrics, a fact that would matter greatly for a man like Kody Brown, who had built a life on controlling narratives. The judge glanced briefly at the gallery, then at Kody. Brown, she began, her voice calm but clipped. This court is now in session. The people of the state have brought serious charges against you. You will have your chance to answer them. But for now, we begin. Kody leaned forward, resting his hands on the table. His attorney gave him a subtle nod, as if to say, keep calm, don't speak unless spoken to. Outside the courthouse it was chaos. News vans lined the street. Fans held signs, some defending him, others demanding justice. Social media was already exploding with hashtags. #Justice for the Wives, #Team Kody, and the more sarcastic #Sister Liars. Inside, the bailiff called the first witness list, and the reality of Kody's situation began to settle in. This was no longer about reality TV ratings, or tabloid rumors, or family gossip. This was the state of Arizona versus Kody Brown. And in this courtroom, the cameras didn't get to decide the ending. And for the first time in years, Kody wasn't in control of the story. The prosecutor didn't waste a single heartbeat. Your Honor, she began, her voice carrying a calm authority that instantly drew the room's attention. This case is about deception, betrayal, and a trail of money that simply doesn't add up. The way she said it, slow, deliberate, made the words feel heavier than any legal jargon ever could. She didn't glance at her notes. She didn't need to. Her gaze shifted from the judge, to the jury, to Kody Brown himself. Then, with one smooth motion, she lifted a thick stack of documents from the evidence table and held them high. The weight of the paper alone made the binder sag in her grip. Bank statements, contracts, wire transfers, financial reports from multiple LLCs. She let the last word hang in the air. From the gallery you could hear the faint rustle of jackets as people leaned forward. This wasn't reality TV anymore. There were no confessionals, no dramatic editing, just facts, dates, and numbers. Or at least that's what the prosecutor promised. She placed the stack on the podium with a thud that made a few spectators flinch. Each of these documents, she continued, tells a part of the same story. The defendant, Mr. Kody Brown, used his position as head of both his family and their business empire to secretly divert over $1 million into private ventures. Ventures that offered no benefit to the family members who helped earn that money. A murmur swept through the courtroom. The judge's gavel tapped once for order, but the reaction was impossible to fully silence. On the second row, Christine's lips pressed into a thin line. She didn't look at Kody, not once. Instead, her eyes stayed fixed on the prosecutor, as if each word validated something she had known for a long time. Janelle, seated next to her, shifted uncomfortably, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She bit down gently on her bottom lip, a telltale sign she was holding something in. Mary sat on the other side of Christine. Her posture was stiff, shoulders square, hands folded neatly. She wasn't showing emotion, but her eyes darted briefly toward Kody, and then away again. At the far end of the bench, Robyn sat slightly apart from the rest. Her arms were folded, and her legs were crossed so tightly it looked painful. She wasn't exchanging glances with anyone. Not Christine, not Janelle, not even Kody. Her face was an unreadable mask. The prosecutor turned toward the jury. The public knows Mr. Brown as the patriarch of sister wives, a man who preached unity, loyalty, and family values. But the evidence will show that behind the cameras, unity was replaced with secrecy, loyalty was replaced with manipulation, and family values were replaced with personal gain. Her voice hardened. We will present proof that funds from the family's shared accounts tied directly to sister wives' earnings, merchandise sales, and public appearances, were withdrawn and transferred into accounts only Mr. Brown controlled. Not for mortgage payments, not for children's education, but for speculative investments that were hidden from his own wives. The jury members were still. One woman in the front row scribbled something down. A man on the far end tapped his pen against his notepad, slowly, eyes locked on Kody. The prosecutor walked over to the evidence table again, and picked up a single document in a clear sleeve. She held it up for the court. This, she said, is a wire transfer receipt dated June 14, 2 years ago. $25,000 moved from the family's shared LLC, an account used to deposit sister wives' earnings, to a company called Horizon West Holdings. That company is not owned by the family. It is owned solely by Mr. Brown. A large monitor behind the witness stand lit up with the scanned receipt. The numbers were crisp, undeniable. In the corner of the gallery, a young woman in a denim jacket whispered, "Wow," and earned herself a glare from the bailiff. Kody shifted in his seat. He leaned toward his attorney, whispering something that made the man nod slowly. His fingers drummed on the table, not nervously, but with that same restless energy viewers of the show might remember. The prosecutor continued. This is not an isolated incident. In the coming days, you will see multiple transfers just like this one, ranging from $10,000 to over $100,000, each pulled from shared accounts, each moved into private ventures without the knowledge or consent of other account holders. She began to list them, date after date, figure after figure. The rhythm of her voice was almost hypnotic, and every few lines she would look directly at the jury as if to make sure they felt the accumulation of evidence building on their shoulders. Christine's fingers tightened around the edge of the bench. Janelle exhaled slowly, as though she'd been holding her breath since the first document appeared. Mary's expression remained controlled, but her eyes had that faraway look, like someone replaying old memories in their head, suddenly seeing them in a different light. Robyn remained still. Only once did her brow furrow slightly, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. Finally, the prosecutor placed the last document down and stepped back. She didn't shout, didn't raise her voice. She simply let the weight of the paper trail do the talking. Your Honor, the state will prove that Mr. Brown's actions were not careless mistakes or misunderstandings. They were deliberate choices. Choices that betrayed not only his business partners but his own family. Choices that prioritize self-interest over trust. Choices that speak volumes about his true character. The words true character seemed to hang in the air like smoke. The judge gave a small nod. We will proceed. Kody's attorney rose, buttoning his suit jacket with measured calm. Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, he began, what you have just heard is a story built on selective facts and assumptions. Kody leaned back slightly, eyes on his attorney now. For a brief moment, his confidence seemed to return, his lips twitching into something almost like a smirk. But the prosecutor's opening had done its work. The jury wasn't smiling. The gallery wasn't whispering anymore. And the wives, all except Robyn, sat with the quiet, tense posture of people who knew this was only the beginning of what would be revealed. The defense attorney rose slowly, his movements deliberate, almost theatrical, as if every second he spent standing was part of his strategy. His voice, when it came, was smooth and steady, the kind of tone meant to wrap around the jury like a warm blanket. "My client is not a thief," he began, looking each juror in the eye. "He is a father, a husband, and a man who has worked tirelessly to provide for his family." He paused, letting the words settle. Kody sat a little taller at the defense table, his chin lifting almost imperceptibly. The attorney continued, "The state wants you to see this man as a villain, as someone who plotted in secret to take what wasn't his. But the truth, ladies and gentlemen, is far simpler, and far less sinister. Running a family of this size, with multiple households, multiple incomes, and a reality TV show contract, that's complicated. Money moves in and out, accounts get transferred, budgets shift, mistakes happen, misunderstandings happen. That's life." The jury listened quietly. One older man in the back row tilted his head slightly, his pen tapping on his notepad. But outside the careful language of the defense, there was a truth hanging over the courtroom. A truth no amount of smooth talking could erase. The Brown family was already fractured long before this trial began. Christine had walked away years earlier, and not quietly. She'd given interviews, gone on podcasts, and even written a book, making it clear she believed Kody had changed. Gone was the man she once saw as a partner. In his place, she said, was someone more focused on control and less on connection. Janelle had been more private, but in recent years, subtle comments in interviews hinted at her frustrations, especially around money. She'd once told a reporter, "I don't know where all of it goes, but I know it's not always where we agreed it would be." And Mary, the first wife, once fiercely loyal, had long been seen by fans as the holdout, the one who might stick it out no matter what. But even she had slowly distanced herself, appearing less on camera and focusing on her own business ventures. By the time the trial began, the idea of a unified Brown family was just a memory. The prosecution knew it, and in a move that shifted the courtroom's energy instantly, Prosecutor Hale rose from her seat. "The state calls Christine Brown to the stand." A ripple of whispers moved through the gallery. Christine stood, wearing a dark green blazer that gave her a calm but commanding presence. Her blonde hair was neatly styled, her expression unreadable. She took the oath, then settled into the witness chair, hands folded in her lap. Hale stepped forward. "Mrs. Brown, Miss Brown," Christine corrected gently but firmly. A faint smile touched the prosecutor's lips. "Miss Brown, can you tell the court about the family's financial meetings during your time in the marriage?" Christine nodded once. "We would have what we called budget nights. All the wives would gather, and Kody would go over the household expenses, mortgages, utilities, groceries, and so on. We'd talk about income from the show, and any side projects." And during these meetings, Hale continued, "Was there ever an agreement on how money should be spent?" "Yes, we'd agree together. Or at least, that's how it was supposed to work." The prosecutor leaned in slightly. "Supposed to." Christine's eyes stayed locked on Hale, but the weight in her voice was unmistakable. "There were times when we'd agree on a budget, and then later I'd find out money had vanished from that budget. Large amounts. No explanation that made sense." Kody shifted in his seat, his jaw tightening. His attorney scribbled a note on his legal pad but didn't interrupt. "Can you give us an example?" Hale asked. Christine took a slow breath. "A few years before I left, we had set aside money to repair one of the family homes. It was an older property, and the roof needed replacing before winter. We all agreed it was a priority. But when it came time to hire the contractor, the money wasn't there. Kody told us it had been redirected for an investment opportunity that would benefit the family in the long run." "And did it benefit the family?" Christine shook her head. "No, the investment failed. We ended up borrowing money to fix the roof anyway." The jury scribbled notes. A woman in the third row looked up at Kody with a faint frown. Hale continued, her voice steady. "How did these incidents affect your trust in Mr. Brown?" Christine's answer came without hesitation. I loved our family. I loved the life we tried to build. But trust, once broken, it's almost impossible to rebuild. At that, Christine turned her head and looked directly at Kody. The moment stretched in silence. His expression didn't change, but his hands curled into fists under the table. Viewers later said, you could feel the tension even through a TV screen. The defense attorney rose for cross-examination. Miss Brown, isn't it true that during your time in the marriage, you benefited from these investments when they succeeded? Christine kept her voice calm. Some of them, yes. But the difference is, those investments were discussed. They weren't done in secret. Is it possible? The attorney pressed. That these secret investments you speak of were simply business decisions you didn't fully understand at the time? Her eyes didn't waver. It's possible I didn't understand every detail, but I do understand what it feels like when someone makes choices with your money and doesn't tell you until it's gone. From the gallery, Janelle's expression softened, almost as if she'd been holding her breath, and Christine had just said what she'd wanted to for years. Mary kept her gaze down, but her lips pressed into a thin, tight line. And Robyn? She didn't move at all. Not a blink, not a shift in her chair. When Christine stepped down from the stand, the energy in the courtroom was different. The defense attorney had managed to plant the seed that maybe she didn't know everything. But her calm, unwavering tone had left an undeniable impression on the jury. For Kody, it was another reminder that the women who once formed the foundation of his public image were now the ones helping to dismantle it, piece by piece, testimony by testimony. And if the prosecution had started with Christine, the jury was left wondering what Janelle or even Mary might say when their turn came. The fractures in the Brown family weren't just personal anymore, they were now evidence. The air in the courtroom was already tense when Prosecutor Hale rose from her seat and announced, "The state calls Michael Anders to the stand." The name landed with weight. Reporters shifted forward, pens poised, the defense attorney's jaw tightened ever so slightly, as if he'd been hoping this witness wouldn't show up. A tall, broad-shouldered man in a navy suit walked confidently toward the witness stand. His gait was steady, his expression stern. Even before he spoke, there was a certain controlled precision in the way he carried himself, like someone who knew exactly why he was here and exactly what he intended to say. After taking the oath, Anders leaned forward slightly, resting his large hands on the wooden railing of the witness box. His voice, when it came, was clipped, deliberate. "I worked with Mr. Brown on several business ventures between 2016 and 2021, Anders began, glancing briefly at Kody before fixing his gaze on the prosecutor. One of those ventures involved property investments in Arizona. Another involved a merchandise line tied to Sister Wives branding. Hale took a slow step forward. "Mr. Anders, during your time working with Mr. Brown, did you ever discuss his family finances?" Anders nodded. "Several times, especially when we were talking about bringing in new investors." "And in those conversations," Hale pressed, "did Mr. Brown ever reveal his approach to handling those finances?" The witness didn't hesitate. "Yes. On more than one occasion, Kody told me he had to move money around, his words, to protect it from being split among his wives, if there were ever separations." The defense attorney shot to his feet. "Hearsay and speculative." Judge Callahan raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Anders, are you testifying to something the defendant told you directly?" "Yes, Your Honor, he said it to me directly." "Then the objection is overruled," the judge said firmly. "This goes to the question of intent." "Proceed." The defense attorney sat down, but not without shooting a sharp glance at Anders. Hale stepped closer to the jury. "Mr. Anders, can you recall exactly what the defendant said to you in that conversation?" Anders nodded again. "We were sitting in his truck outside a property site. He told me, 'Mike, you gotta understand, this isn't about hiding money, it's just smart business. If things go south with one of the wives, I don't want them walking away with half of what I built. The others don't need to know everything." A gasp rippled through the gallery. One woman in the back covered her mouth. Another whispered, "Did he just say that?" before the bailiff shot her a warning glance. Kody's face darkened, But he didn't look at Anders. His attorney scribbled furiously on his legal pad, then slid it across the table. Kody read it, nodded once, and leaned back in his chair, jaw clenched. The prosecutor let the silence hang for a moment, letting the jury absorb the weight of Anders' statement before she moved on. Mr. Anders, did Mr. Brown ever explain how he moved this money? He said he'd take it out of the shared LLC accounts, then put it into other companies he controlled directly, sometimes in his name, sometimes under names tied to new business ventures. He called them buffers. In the gallery, Christine's face was impassive, but her fingers twisted together in her lap. Janelle glanced at Mary, who gave the smallest of nods, an unspoken acknowledgement that this lined up with things they'd long suspected. Robyn's expression didn't change, though she shifted slightly in her seat, crossing one leg over the other with a quick, sharp motion. When Anders stepped down, the atmosphere felt different, heavier as though the oxygen had been pulled from the room. But Hale wasn't finished. "Your Honor," she said, "the state calls forensic financial analyst Dr. Linda Perez." A petite woman in a gray suit took the stand, carrying a laptop and a thick binder. She was sworn in, then immediately began connecting her computer to the courtroom's display screen. Within seconds, a timeline appeared, clean, color-coded, and meticulous. Dr. Perez's voice was calm but authoritative. "I reviewed 5 years of financial records connected to the Brown family's LLCs, personal accounts, and affiliated businesses. What I found was a repeated pattern of withdrawals from joint accounts into privately held companies, many of which are not linked to any known business operations." She clicked a button, and the screen shifted to a bar graph. Each spike represented a large transfer. "You'll see here the transfers in early 2018, totaling over $300,000, all within a 4-month period. These funds were moved into shell companies registered to Mr. Brown personally." The jurors leaned forward. Even those in the back row were watching intently. Another click, and a new chart appeared. These transactions were not isolated events. Over the course of 5 years, more than $1.1 million was transferred in this manner. The amounts vary, but the pattern is consistent: withdrawals from shared accounts, reallocation into entities controlled solely by Mr. Brown. The defense attorney stood. "Dr. Perez, isn't it true that some of these funds were invested in projects that could potentially benefit the family?" "Potentially, yes," Perez said evenly. "But my analysis shows no evidence that those benefits ever materialized. In fact, several of the businesses closed within a year, with no record of profits distributed back to the family accounts." Behind her, the charts continued to change. Arrows connecting accounts, lines snaking between companies, each one narrowing toward the same conclusion. Kody Brown had been moving money in ways that kept it under his control and out of reach of others. For the jury, it wasn't just about numbers anymore. It was about the visual, a map of financial movements that looked less like business strategy and more like evasion. The defense countered fiercely. Mercer rose, pacing in front of the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, these are numbers. Lines on a chart. What you don't see is the context. The meetings, the discussions, the reasons for these transfers. My client is an entrepreneur. Entrepreneurs take risks. Sometimes those risks don't pay off immediately. That doesn't make them criminals." He glanced at the jury, his voice softening. "Think about your own finances. Have you ever moved money from one account to another to cover a shortfall, to try an investment, to help a friend? That's not theft. That's life." It was a good attempt, but the visual damage had been done. The image of those shifting lines and arrows stayed burned in the jurors' minds. And for Kody, this was the moment the trial stopped being just about explanations and started being about whether anyone in that room believed him anymore. The tension was palpable, the divide between the two narratives widening with each piece of evidence. By the time court adjourned for the day, the chatter in the hallway was deafening. Reporters were already filing headlines. "Bombshell testimony. Former associate says Kody Brown hid money from wives. Financial analyst reveals $1.10 million shifted into Kody-controlled companies." Inside his SUV pulling away from the courthouse, Kody stared out the window, saying nothing. The man who once thrived in front of cameras now sat in silence, knowing that tomorrow the headlines wouldn't fade. The courtroom felt like it was holding its breath. Every single person, from the stern-faced judge to the most casual reporter in the back, was frozen, eyes fixed on the jury box. Kody Brown sat at the defense table, his hands folded tightly, knuckles pale from the pressure. His attorney leaned slightly toward him, whispering something only he could hear. The bailiff's voice rang out, commanding attention. All rise for the jury. The 12 men and women filed in, their faces unreadable. Some held their notes close, others kept their hands folded, but none made eye contact with Kody. The foreperson stood, holding a folded sheet of paper that contained the words everyone in the room, and thousands watching online via live updates, had been waiting for. The judge's voice was calm, but the weight in it was unmistakable. On the charge of financial misconduct, we find the defendant. A pause. A pause so long it felt unnatural. People shifted in their seats. A cough broke the silence. Kody's lawyer glanced toward the jury, trying to read their expressions. And then, before the foreperson could finish, Judge Callahan suddenly lifted her hand. "One moment," she said firmly. "Before we proceed, I have been handed a request from the prosecution, urgent in nature, regarding newly discovered evidence." Gasp rippled across the room. Christine's eyebrows shot upward. Janelle leaned toward Mary and whispered something under her breath. Even Robyn, who had sat still and silent for most of the trial, now leaned forward slightly, her lips parting in shock. The judge continued, "This evidence, if valid, could alter the direction of these proceedings. For that reason, I am ordering a temporary delay in reading the verdict until we can address its admissibility." The crowd erupted. The bailiff had to call for order multiple times, his voice growing sharper each time. Outside, word spread faster than the autumn wind. Reporters scrambled to update their stories. Cameramen zoomed in on the courthouse doors, ready to capture the moment Kody emerged. Fans and critics alike pressed against the barricades, shouting their opinions. Some held homemade signs. "Justice for the wives. Kody is innocent. Truth over fame." One woman in the crowd was live streaming on her phone, telling thousands of viewers, "This is insane." They were literally about to read the verdict. And now, boom, new evidence. What does this even mean? Social media caught fire instantly. On X, formerly Twitter, hashtags like #KodyTrialTwist and #Justice for Christine began trending. TikTok filled with reaction videos. YouTube commentators started going live, trying to dissect the possible implications. Inside, Kody sat stiff as a statue. If he was nervous, he didn't show it. But those closest to him noticed the slight twitch in his jaw, the way his fingers drummed quietly against the defense table. His attorney leaned in again, speaking softly but urgently. At one point, Kody shook his head, his mouth tightening into a thin line. For a man who had spent years in front of TV cameras, this was a different kind of spotlight, one he couldn't control, script, or edit. Christine watched him closely, her arms folded. She wasn't smiling, but there was a quiet steadiness in her gaze, the look of someone who had weathered storms before. Though details were scarce, whispers in the courtroom hinted at what the new evidence might be. A set of financial records uncovered by a forensic accountant working with the prosecution, allegedly showing even more undisclosed transfers, some tied to overseas accounts. If true, this could be devastating for Kody's defense. The judge recessed the court for the day, instructing both legal teams to meet in chambers the next morning to review the evidence. The jury was excused, looking as bewildered as everyone else. The second Kody stepped outside, the flash of cameras was blinding. Microphones were shoved toward his face. "Kody, are you worried about the new evidence? Do you have anything to say to your fans? Christine, do you think justice will be served?" Kody didn't answer. His attorney placed a firm hand on his shoulder and guided him toward a waiting black SUV. Robyn followed closely, her head down, while the other wives, ex-wives in some cases, left in separate vehicles. The drive away from the courthouse was a gauntlet of shouting, honking, and cell phones held high. That night, every major news network covered the twist. Analysts debated what it could mean. Former reality TV producers weighed in on how this would affect Kody's public image, and legal experts speculated on possible outcomes. On Instagram, Christine posted a single sentence, "Truth doesn't fear investigation." It was liked over 500,000 times within hours. Meanwhile, Robyn broke her silence in a short video, saying, "We know the truth, and it will come out. Please don't rush to judgment." Fans were divided. Some praised Christine's courage. Others defended Kody fiercely, arguing he was being targeted because of his fame. For Kody Brown, this was no longer just about money. It was about his legacy. The man who once presented himself as a loving, if unconventional, family leader was now painted in headlines as a calculating figure at the center of $1 million storm. Every episode of Sister Wives that fans once watched with fascination now took on a different tone in hindsight. Viewers replayed old clips, searching for hints, clues, or moments that foreshadowed this downfall. The unwritten final chapter. As the courthouse lights went dark, and the streets emptied, one thing was clear: this story was far from over. The trial would resume, the evidence would be reviewed, and the verdict would eventually be read. But until then, speculation would run wild, feeding the endless cycle of news coverage, social media debates, and YouTube breakdowns. Some believed the delay gave Kody a chance to prove his innocence. Others saw it as the beginning of the end. And somewhere in between were those who knew one truth about public scandals: the court of public opinion often moves faster and hits harder than the court of law. Whether Kody emerged vindicated or condemned, his life would never return to what it was before the day the gavel first struck. Because in this courtroom drama, the final chapter was still unwritten, and the world was watching, one headline at a time.